Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Tisky Sour. I'm Michael Walker and I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Aaron Bastani from the south coast of England. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm very good, Michael. How are you?
I'm fine. Coming to terms with the fact that we're going to be socially distant potentially until the new year at the very earliest, in fact.
Well, I think we're going to have social distancing for a couple of years. Yeah, it's kind of mad, right?
Yeah.
And even the vaccine numbers being peddled by the media are generally quite optimistic. It's kind of crazy. There was a great interview last night, by the way.
Yeah, he was excellent, wasn't he? If you didn't watch last night, we had a professor of epidemiology from Harvard University telling us all the ins and the outs of the virology and what epidemiology tells us about the spread of coronavirus and how it can be responded to by government policy. Tonight, our main theme of the show is going to be, this new realization that social distancing measures are going to be around for a long time. That was sort of squeezed out of Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer, yesterday. The UK government have been fairly evasive about this particular question, but Nicola Sturgeon made it also quite clear today in a press briefing from the Scottish government. Then in the second half of the show, we're going to be joined by Lara McNeil, who's a member of the Labour Party's NEC. She's going to be talking to us about the most recent meeting they had, which was today, and which was about the Labour leaks. And we're also going to talk about Keir Starmer's first PMQs. There was one word which the entire lobby and the entire PLP chose to describe it as. It begins with F. You can guess it now, or you can wait until that particular part of the show. To start, though, before we start, obviously we want more people to watch this stream. So share this link, tweet on the hashtag TiskySour to our first story. The UK government have remained tight-lipped about their exit strategy from the lockdown, but yesterday, answering a question in the daily press conference, Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer, gave the game away. Here he talks about what our lives will look like until we have a vaccine or therapeutics for COVID-19.
Until we have those, and the probability of having those anytime in the next calendar year are incredibly small, and I think we should be realistic about that. We're going to have to rely on other social measures, which of course are very socially disruptive, as everyone is finding at the moment. But until that point, that is what we will have to do, and it'll have to be the best combination that maximises the outlooks. But it's going to take a long time, and I think we need to be aware of that.
So Chris Whitty saying, the only two real exit strategies are going to be a vaccine or some decent therapeutics, which mean that COVID-19 isn't particularly dangerous because you can treat it effectively. And until we find those, we're going to have pretty socially disruptive, I think was the words he used, form of social distancing. This was followed today. So that was yesterday. Today, Nicola Sturgeon laid out Scotland's exit strategy from the lockdown. We can take a look at that now.
What we will be seeking to do is find a new normal, a way of living alongside this virus, but in a form that keeps it under control and stops it taking the toll that we know it can do. Social distancing and limiting our contacts with others will be a fact of life for a long time to come, certainly until treatments and ultimately a vaccine offer different solutions. So that means possibly for the rest of this year and maybe even beyond.
And that all looks, so both what Whitty and Sturgeon said, looks a lot like what Alex Wickham published as, what top advisors had told him was the government's exit strategy. So as I've already said, the UK government are being a bit cagey about this, but they're happy to brief journalists before telling us ordinary members of the public. So we're going to go to some quotes from that article from Saturday before I go to Aaron for his thoughts. So a best case scenario being worked on by the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, SAGE, hopes to end lockdown restrictions for certain non-essential shops and industries in the short term from early to mid-May. Of course, I should clarify this is the exit plan for the entire UK government. Next graphic. Some social distancing measures could then gradually be relaxed in the medium term in June and July, eventually leading to the reopening of pubs and restaurants towards the end of the summer. Long-term shielding for elderly and vulnerable people could mean limits on people seeing their parents or grandparents over 70 for as long as 12 to 18 months until a vaccine is found. And the timeline relies on sage scientists calculating how many new COVID-19 infections per day the UK's test and trace capabilities can manage, and an impossible decision for Downing Street on how many deaths per day they are willing to accept in order to be able to lift some restrictions before there is a vaccine. So I'll go to you, Aaron. This is pointing to a particular vision of Britain for the next 9 months. There will be some test and tracing, but both Nicola Sturgeon there and whoever was briefing Alex Wickham and Chris Whitty seem to be accepting that there is going to be, a reasonable level of coronavirus sort of moving through the population. We'll still have to keep measures, to keep R below 1 so that it doesn't spread exponentially and we get another huge peak. But it's going to be around, and we're going to have to, act as if coronavirus is always around, especially, for older or vulnerable people. That could mean, shielding, which, is a somewhat polite way of saying locking them away. That could be incredibly costly. I mean, what do you think when you think about British society looking like this for the next 9 months?
Well, I think it's important to say that the discussion around any economic recovery has been about whether it'll be a V or a U. And I think what the long-term reality is now, like you said, there'll be significant social distancing. We're going to see the collapse of certain industries. And I mean, I don't use that word lightly. We're going to see the long-term collapse of certain industries, music events, festivals, pubs, bars, nightclubs, restaurants, even football, packing out a stadium, sports events, boxing events. Anything where you're having thousands of people squeezed together into a small area, that's going to be out of the question, probably it looks anyway, I mean, I could be wrong, it looks like at least a year, maybe more. And that's going to be a significant blow to the economy. And I think a lot of the wishful thinking has been we'll spend 250 billion of government money, we'll run up a huge deficit, but look, we'll come out of this just like we came out of the Great Depression, really hell for leather economic growth, which often happens after a big downturn, right? And that's a fact. What this indicates is that won't happen with this. Even if we have the removal of the lockdown in June, July, many industries won't fully recover for several years. And that in tourism, aviation, certain social mores will change. You certainly won't see people packed onto, or you will, but not to the same extent, people packed on the Central Line or commuting as they were previously, far more working from home, far greater timidity around taking those kinds of risks. And that's clearly going to have a big impact on the economy. And so from the government's perspective, they're looking at a couple of $100 billion this year, and they were looking for a recovery, a big upturn, 2021, 2022, 2023. What this tells us actually is we might be flatlining for a couple of years. We shouldn't, on the left, we shouldn't be worrying about that. But for the Tories, that's a major problem. Because, of course, you've got this big deficit to deal with. You've got stagnating growth. And they want to go back to usual. Even if it took 6 months, they want to go literally back to where we were in January this year. And that doesn't seem to be the case now. Even if we go back to 50, 60% of normality in 3 or 4 months, which could happen, long-term economic change is staying with us.
I'm just going to say, I think now it's been a couple of days, your hair's looking genuinely good. I think you're probably on 3 millimeters now. It's perfect length.
Really? Oh, well, I just want to say to people taking the mickey out of me in the comments, it was not an homage to Michael Walker. I just want to be
nothing
clear.
to be ashamed of.
No, but I just want to be clear. I don't want my intentions to be misread. I was using a pair of 10-year-old clippers.
We're going to talk, in a moment about sort of public attitudes to the lockdown. But first of all, I want to talk a bit about today's press conference in Westminster, which Matt Hancock was delivering, because it was very, very interesting. And I think it sort of brought to light that there are some divisions in the UK government, and they seem to be going public. So both what Alex Wickham was briefed and what Nicola Sturgeon was talking about imply that there is going to be, a reasonable level of the virus moving through society for the next 12 months, which is why we need to remain socially distant and why we need to shield the elderly. That's the biggest clue. If you need to shield the elderly, that's because there's quite a lot of the virus around. And that is seen as the easiest way out of the lockdown, because it means that we don't have to intensify the lockdown to get R down to close to 0, to try and almost eradicate the transmission of the virus before reopening society. But it is, it's somewhat controversial because it means the virus is going to move through the population. Lots more people will die. The idea is that you can sort of manage the spread via social distancing, or potentially sort of re-locking down society if it looks like we're going to get a peak, so we stay within ICU capacity and we don't have the kind of excess deaths that were expected in some of the most severe modeling. But it's present in our lives, and for the next 12 months, which means that old people have to isolate. The other option is you do what has been called the hammer and the dance option, which is that you say, what we're going to do is we're going to have an incredibly intense lockdown, so intense that we stop transmission altogether. And then after the lockdown, what we're going to do is introduce a really aggressive system of track and trace, which means that we sort of start all over again. So sort of in an ideal world, when coronavirus was first announced in China, we would have prepared, which is with an extensive track and trace system, which means that you can contain it, you can suppress it, and basically old people can then go to the shops because we're fairly confident the virus isn't around. Up to now, it seemed that the government is not considering that. It's too ambitious. It would require too much intervention. It's too high risk because you could end up being in lockdown for a while, and never come up with the goods when it comes to test and trace. But Matt Hancock today actually, he sounded today a bit like he was thinking for going for the hammer and the dance. Let's go to a clip now.
Test, track and trace done effectively, can help to suppress the transmission in a way that allows you then to have lesser social distancing rules. And critically, test, track and trace works more effectively when the rate of new cases is lower.
So that he's basically there explaining the hammer and the dance strategy, which is to say you have to intensify the lockdown, get it down to almost zero, and then introduce aggressive track and trace, which is the kind of thing they've been doing in East Asia, but which no one in government has been sort of suggesting is possible so far. Which means that I was kind of thinking, I was siding with Matt Hancock, and I feel kind of strange. I mean, what do you think about Aaron? Do you think I'm being naive in sort of thinking that potentially Matt Hancock is sort of coming around to having a sensible response to coronavirus?
Well, I think all the evidence appears to be that there's this schism in the Tory party. We talked about it the day before yesterday. And you've got Rishi Sunak on one side. You've got some other senior civil servants. Basically, let's go back and open the economy as quickly as possible. They're big fear, and it's a justified fear. We're going to see the biggest economic downturn in modern British history. We can't really model it. The worst case scenario is what happens really with the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. We know that's not going to happen. We're not going to see male life expectancy fall to 57. But it's also going to be worse in the short term than anything we saw in the 30s, right? What they want to avoid is the longer term thing, which is that years-long depression. And so it's a justified thing to talk about. That doesn't mean they care more about, which they do, by the way, but that in isolation doesn't mean they care more about the economy than human life, okay? And that's the focus. Matt Hancock, and I think you're right here, his focus instead is, look, we just want to right now put human life absolutely first. And I think he's doing that because he's the health secretary. He doesn't want to go down in history as the health secretary who allowed 250,000 people to die on his watch, which is an entirely plausible number. He doesn't want to go down as the health secretary who basically oversaw scenes reminiscent of the Black Death in 21st century Britain, corpses being carried out of their houses. And I mean, that's what's going to happen if 250,000 people die. So I think Matt Hancock is actually, he's not being good because as health secretary, he's not doing the things he should be able to do. But I think to an extent he's constrained by decisions by others and also his predecessors. And of course, the fact that the Tories indulged in austerity for so long. But right now he's making the right noises. Yes, I agree with you.
Well, it's also important to note it's a complete Damascene conversion from him, right? So he, for the first part of this crisis, the whole Conservative government was saying, oh, we'll go for basically the sort of herd immunity strategy. Who are these idiots who think that we can stop the virus in its tracks? The Europeans aren't like the East Asians who'll just follow rules, and the Italians and the Spanish who think that they can have a lockdown to get rid of this virus. They're idiots. What we're going to do is let it slowly move through the population. And then they realized, one, actually, that's pretty risky, and two, the public hate it. So they're having this now conversion to think maybe we should be ambitious like the South Koreans would be. And that's because of public pressure. You can see it if you watch the press conferences through the weeks. Last week, they were talking a lot about antibody tests. We're going to have a different passport if you're immune or not. And that's the strategy which makes sense if you're going to have a lot of the virus around. They've completely changed to talking about mass swab tests and track and trace, which is what you try and do if you're trying to suppress it. So they've completely shifted strategy. It's because of public opinion. But obviously, I hope they're successful with this new one. We're going to talk about public opinion, and if there is going to be some kind of social distancing, whoever wins out here for at least the next 9 months, that is going to have social, political consequences. First of all, though, you're watching Tysky Sour, you're watching Novara Media. If you're enjoying this show, tap the like button. But most importantly, make sure you are subscribed to the Novara Media YouTube channel. I want to get us up to 100K kind of soon. I know we're on 70K, so that's ambitious. But I just feel like every day when I wake up and I see that we only have that many subscribers, something dies inside me. So click the subscribe button. Also, obviously, if you want to support us financially, which is actually more important than subscribing, quite frankly, please go to novaramedia.com/support. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. You are what makes this possible. All right, let's go to some of these surveys. So, I mean, there's a strange phenomenon I suppose when I can only speak for myself here. When I think about how I'm relating to the lockdown, whereas I'm dealing with it fine. As you know, I do most of my work on my laptop. I don't mind my flat. I've got a very small balcony, but it's all fine. I get along with my partner. So sometimes you can think maybe people don't mind this lockdown that much. But what's interesting, and specific about a lockdown is you kind of have no idea how everyone else is feeling because you're not speaking to anyone by definition. So you do sometimes have to rely on opinion polls to sort of work out where the public mood is, however imperfect they might be. And we're going to go to a couple of those now. So there was a YouGov poll that was published in The Independent earlier in the week, got quite a lot of traction because it had the headline, only 1 in 9 people want to go back to normal. But I'm going to read a quote from that now. So 51% of respondents said they had noticed cleaner air, and 27% said they had recognized more wildlife since the lockdown began. 40% said they felt a stronger sense of community in their local area since the virus shut down normal life, while 39% said they had been more in touch with friends and family. And then what they also said, so the headline figure was that only 13% of the population said they want to go back to normal life after the lockdown. 57%, in contrast, agreed with the statement, "I hope to change some things about my life, and I hope we will have learned from this crisis as a country." I'm going to go to the next set of polls before I go to you, Aaron, because they're very much related. Sky also released a YouGov poll today, which found that there's an incredible level of support for the lockdown among the population. They want it to continue because they feel it's necessary to continue. But there have been some negative consequences for it. People are more anxious. Let's go to the quote. "Despite the government's hour-long daily exercise allowance, only 30% say they are having more of a workout than normal, 29% less than normal, and 38% about the same." You could say that's pretty neutral, really, isn't it? Some 7% told YouGov they were having more sex than usual, while 18% said they are having less sex, and the rest say no change or they aren't sure. The change in reported sexual activity is particularly acute for those under 50. Some 39% of 18 to 24-year-olds and 21% of 25 to 49-year-olds say they are having less sex since lockdown. That's sort of one of the trials of life under lockdown for most people. And then sort of about people's mental health, over 49% of Britons are more anxious, 45% are sadder, and 32% worse off financially. In general, those under 50 are finding it more difficult than those over 50, with 58%, very big number, of 18 to 24s saying they are more anxious compared to 40% of over 65s. So we're getting a lot of mixed messages there, Aaron. People don't want to go back to normal. People are noticing that the air is cleaner, that nature is coming back, but they're also more anxious, having less sex, and having financial problems. How do you interpret all of this?
Basically, I think that, people should be more anxious, shouldn't they? Because, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Anxiety, it's like stress. Oh, I'm really stressed. Or why are you stressed? Or because I have an exam tomorrow. You should be stressed. That's a normal thing to happen, So I think anxiety in the middle of a pandemic is justified. I think that young people having less sex, obviously, that's inevitable. You're going out less. Having less money. Well, we're in the middle of a major economic downturn. So all those things entirely make sense to me. What I would say is, I went for a walk yesterday, just along the sea, and the water did look incredibly clear. Now this might be like a placebo, and I'm sort of just imagining it, but it was the clearest I've ever seen the sea in this country. It was almost miraculously clear. It was like the Mediterranean. It was like Camino in Malta, and that's because I just couldn't see any boats. There was just very little freight coming in and out of the sort of nearby port. And the sea looks different. The beach looks different. Wildlife and nature just feels different. And so I think it's going to be in social movements they call it liminality, when you suspend everyday social relations and people reconsider their place in the world, sort of how their social function, their values, their desires. And kind of in a weird way, that's what we're all going through right now as a society. I'm not saying it's a necessarily good thing, but we're clearly in the middle of a suspension. I think in many ways it probably is a suspension of everyday reality. And everything we take as sort of inevitable becomes revealed as contingent and so on. Go on.
I mean, there is every time we talk about this, you've got to recognize that everyone's experience of lockdown is very different. And for some people, it's going to be an incredibly difficult, traumatic time. People in abusive relationships, for example, or just people who have to live with their family and never get a break. I don't live with any children, for example, which means this is quite an easy period for myself.
Yeah, but I know what you're saying, but okay, so people have.
But what I was going to say is, I do
even
think
they're having
many positive outcomes from this. I do think there is a stronger sense of communality. A stronger sense that we're all in this together. People, we always mock it when people talk about the Blitz spirit, and we've got all these Brexiteers saying we survived the Blitz, we can survive a no-deal Brexit. It's like, if a no-deal Brexit is as damaging as a Blitz, we fucking don't want to do it. No one chooses to get bombed. But when people did hark back to that, they were also, saying something real. People did want to have some sort of collective action that we were all involved in at the same time, which required us to pull together. And that's what we're living through at the moment. After the Second World War, that was followed by the development of the welfare state. Yes, you had a historically powerful labor movement, but you also had, an immediate memory of pulling together and sort of showing the limits of individualism. And that is what could come out of this. That's potentially what Rishi Sunak is so worried about, which is why he wants to come out of the lockdown quickly.
I agree.
Because the more we get used to this kind of lifestyle, the less we are likely to say, yeah, let's go back to neoliberal capitalism. That's a good idea.
Or not even, our social roles. I think I said this in the show a couple of weeks ago. I went into a co-op shop, and there was a young woman, and she said, I have to have a presentation. I'm going to do it over Skype. Presumably she was a student or whatever. And they said, you don't have to go tell them you're a key worker, like sort of joking around with colleagues. And that realization, oh, wow, 2 months ago, this was a bullshit job and I was on minimum wage. Now I'm a key worker. Actually, the work I do, and they're being told this by everybody, and they know it's true, it's objectively true. The work I do is more important than somebody who earns £1 million bonus working in the City of London. Or the work I do now is actually more important than the job I want in 10 years' time to be a digital marketer and live in London and work in a place. And so actually this job I do now for £8, £9 an hour produces more social value. And that is going to be a mass recognition, realization, an ideological realization for millions of people. It's a really, really big deal. And I think it's also one of the reasons why we won't get a UBI. I'm not a huge fan of UBIs generally, universal basic income. They're incredibly expensive. And I think, public ownership, free travel or healthcare or education at the point of use makes more sense to me. But Rishi Sunak would have said, we've got the furlough scheme, that's going to cost lots of money. Okay, a UBI, far more extensive, probably less money per head. All right, that would probably cover a lot more people. It would mean far fewer people sort of go through the net, lower bureaucratic overheads. But look, that's the kind of thing that people just kind of get used to. Just like we talked about it before, the council tax in this country doesn't work. Why do we still have it? Because the poll tax was a failure. You then had this sort of intermediary response, and guess what? 30 years later, we still have it. They would be petrified about the same thing happen with a potential UBI. So I agree with you. I think that Tory strategy going forward about trying to reset the economy to normal as quickly as possible is about undermining that sense of liminality. And I'm not presenting the idea of liminal space as and sort of a purely good thing. It can be a negative thing. There might be a guy and a high-powered couple, and their cleaner no longer comes to clean their house. And they're like, fuck, there's actually loads of work. They realize that, cleaning is really fucking hard. Excuse my French. I shouldn't.
That's a good
swear.
thing, though, right? We want that. We want
No,
the rich to discover that cleaning's
Of course,
hard.
but for them it's discomforting. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yeah.
Or a parent that don't have to look after the kids, the other one looks after the kids. They don't think actually they do real work. Actually, because I'm in waged labour and you're not in waged labour. You're in sort of unpaid social reproduction. I'm the one that's doing the real work here. Well, they're going to realise there's a hell of a lot of work to look after a couple of kids during the day. So, broadly speaking, I think when I say it's a good thing, I don't mean it from a utilitarian point of view that we're all having more pleasure, but I do think it's going to reveal to many, 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 many people, where the creation of social value happens in society.
We have Lara McNeil in the background. Do we have Lara there? Should we bring Lara in? Yes. Hello. How's it going?
Hi. Good. Thank you.
You've had a busy day today, right? You've been in the NEC meeting and you've been then speaking to Manchester Momentum, I think, about Labour League.
Yeah. It was like 4 hours today, NEC, I think. So not that bad. Maybe 3 and a bit. With only one agenda item. So, it was.
And the only agenda item was the Labour leaks.
It was. So technically, it was the terms of reference of the investigation that Keir and Angela announced. For starters, it's good that we had this meeting. That was like one of the first demands I think we had, was to have an actual meeting and discuss it. So the fact that it's not being pushed under the carpet is good. So that's a good thing. And we agreed the terms of reference basically. So of the investigation.
What are those terms of reference? What they're going to be?
Let's bring Aaron in as well,
because he loves this shit about the Labour leaks. So what's in them? Tell us.
Okay, so they're
is it public information? Are you allowed to?
It's not yet. No, they are going to publish them. I asked them to do that, and Keir agreed and said it would be published. Right. I think we have to show a commitment to transparency now after everything that's happened. We were presented with a fairly fair draft, and the kind of scope of the investigation is, as was said, why the report was commissioned, why it was, how it was leaked, and the content. And I think the terms of reference do focus on the content. We amended it specifically, Anne Henderson, supported by John Lansman, amended it specifically to include the words racism, sexism, toxic culture, or culture in Labour Party workplaces as being one of the allegations to be looked into. For some reason, there was an amendment on the looking specifically into the electoral campaigns, which was kind of rejected, but that was only like a specific mention of it. Like the scope of the report is very vague and like broad, so hopefully that will be looked into. I moved amendments to remove the reasons why the report was compiled in the first place, because I think focusing on the reasons on why, one, I think it's pretty clear on page 21 of the report. It does state the scope and why it was put in place, and it falls into the criteria of the EHRC investigation, and clearly it's stuff that we're supposed to know. So kind of criminalizing, or like making it not criminalizing, but making it seem like a bad thing that the report was compiled in the first place seems really bad, thing is the stuff that it was revealed was very necessary to be revealed. Amendments were made in talk about the whistleblowers as well. So hopefully there'll be protection for people that clearly sort of blew the whistle on things they thought were wrong and a miscarriage of justice. But it's still saying that the leak was bad in terms of data protection, and there's stuff going on about that. But I think it was pretty fair to be honest. We don't know the names
very
yet.
Optimistic, actually. I wasn't expecting you to be in such a good mood about a 4-hour NEC meeting.
I think.
No, sorry, go on. Well, I was going to say, we still don't know who's going to be doing the investigation, do we? Is that for a future NEC meeting? Is it you guys that get to decide, or how is that going to be? Who's going to appoint the person who does this investigation?
So it's going to be a decision that comes from the leadership, is my understanding, and it's going to be brought to a NEC meeting, which will approve the names. It will be a panel of 3 people and a chair. So that is still up for discussion. We didn't discuss any names yet, but I understand there's discussions going underway. I think Keir and Angela were very clear. They didn't want to push it into the long grass. They wanted to get on with it. Suspensions, I think, is sort of something which is a bit disappointing, which hasn't happened yet. So we need to chase that up. But Keir did say, I wrote down what he said. It was like, basically, that this investigation won't stop any disciplinary action. Yeah, he said, we do not believe this investigation precludes disciplinary action against people who have breached the party's rules. Anyone who's breached the party's rules should be taken through disciplinary processes, was my vague recollection of what he said. And I think that's important and that's good. I think Keir's had the hindsight of what's happened with the anti-Semitism crisis, and I think he wants to get it right. And obviously there's arguments within this stuff, but ultimately I think he realizes he couldn't have ignored it. I think he wants to get the membership on side. So I think there's an element of good faith we have to have here. But yeah, I mean, there's things that could have been better about the terms of reference. But I think overall, as long as it focuses on the content, and I'm glad the NEC has oversight of the panel. So we'll see. I'm not saying it's all going to be plain sailing from here. We don't know what the investigation is going to come out with. And I think it's right that people keep the pressure on to focus on, that the panel focus on certain allegations in the report, especially around racism or whatever, which may not get covered. You know, we hope it will get covered fairly, but that's for people to decide. But I think the investigation should be published as well. I think a redacted copy of the report should be published, but I think I did raise that today. I didn't really get an answer, basically. But the terms of reference being published was the key thing, just to show that, like, we're getting it on the road. It's going to be shown to the NEC, hopefully in sort of July time. You know, that's fairly quick investigation. Bear in mind, it's like 1,000 pages of allegations, and there's more we haven't seen, internal communications. So yeah, I'm pretty happy. Basically, there's no point causing fights over nothing, is there? If you're happy with the general direction, you know, we've made our points, we've lost and won some points in the NEC. We go forward from here, but that doesn't mean that if the investigation comes out with certain things that members can't challenge it. But I think when things are positive and look like they're going in the right direction, we should try to unify around that.
Aaron, are you reassured? You've been following this story very closely.
Well, yeah, I've got a few questions, I guess. Is your instinct to trust Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner to administer quite a fair process over the next couple of months?
Yes, because they don't have any control over it now, really. If we, as you know, I think people thought the names are going to be important, right? Like we're going to have to make sure that they're genuinely independent and they don't have any link to Keir Starmer, obviously from his legal background and, you know, the Labour Party or anything. Yeah, we'll just have to make sure they're genuinely independent. And from then on, they have no say over it. So, yeah, I do trust that, because this is the only element of our jurisdiction, is to decide these terms of reference today to give to people to conduct the investigation. There's no, as I understand it, obligation on the NEC to do anything with it afterwards. So the independence is genuine.
And was your instinct today, do you think there'll be people trying to push back against it? Obviously, the NEC comprises multiple aspects of the party, various different interests, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think institutionally some people will want to, obviously you've said the leadership doesn't want to. Do you think there are sort of elements within the party that would like to dampen any investigation down for any particular reasons?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm not going to name names. I think,
of course,
I'm happy because the leadership is showing the right direction.
Right.
There are people in the NEC and in the right of the party who are trying to trivialise what's in this report as normal politics, which in my opinion just shows what they think goes on in normal conversations, which is extremely worrying. There were things said in the NEC today which I completely disagree with, and I'm not going to make public because I think it's just unhelpful, but it's clear that there is going to be pushback from people on the you know, right of the party in regards to focusing and using a distractor about the leak of the report, and why it was you know, compiled. People who say this is trying to shift the blame on anti-Semitism. I think people doubted the original report and how it was compiled. So maybe this independent investigation, if it finds it's true, will help show those people that, you know, whether this stuff is true and the extent of it, and maybe they'll rethink it. But yeah, I have heard some people say some things which is very worrying. So yeah, let's hope if this is taken out of the hands of the NEC in terms of the investigation, then we'll just see an objective document which the NEC will have to accept no matter what they're trying to do. But yeah, I think now it's gone this far that we've actually had an NEC meeting on it. That's already gone beyond what some of them would have wanted, which is to completely ignore it. So I'm happy. And I don't think that Keir and Angela agree with some of the more extreme views, I would say, on the NEC. So that's kind of filled me with confidence.
Great.
Good.
What's the feeling on the NEC at the moment? Is there a sort of fine balance between the left and the right, or is there now this sort of new faction, which is the sort of like Keir soft left faction in the middle?
Yeah, I think in general, when a leader asks the NEC to do something, there is sort of a feeling of like kind of unity. So when Jeremy asked us to do stuff, or present something, it's normally seen as something that should be followed. So when Keir and Angela put some amendments forward, basically there was a lot of consensus around it. So I wrote down some of the votes today, like the numbers, and it's just like 26-10, 36-0, 16-19, 25-10. So it's kind of all over the place. Like I've said this to you guys before, that it's not always left and right. There is a lot of discussion around things, but the left do have a minority now in general. So yeah, we did lose some amendments on, like I said, removing that was like a left-right divide, I'd say, on the removing how the report was compiled or whatever. But yeah, in general, it was a bit of a mix, and there were a lot of consensus around what Angela and Keir have said. I think, yeah, when they're not seen as overtly factional, we kind of just agree. But we always want consensus. Consensus is such a good thing at the NEC, and that's why, we voted on the terms of reference at the end, and we said, right, we're supporting this. So, that kind of thing of consensus is good, because obviously party unity is important.
What a very conciliatory, positive message coming from an NEC meeting. That's not how I imagined them to be. We're going to go to another Labour story now, which is Keir Starmer's first parliamentary questions. So this was obviously yesterday, the first time that Keir Starmer stood up. Well, it wasn't against Boris Johnson because he's still off sick. It was against Dominic Raab this time around. Let's go to a clip from that before we discuss it. Can we get that up? Yes.
Testing is obviously crucial at every stage of the pandemic. But we have been very slow, and we're way behind other European countries. Now, the Health Secretary made a very important commitment to 100,000 tests a day by the end of April. But yesterday, the figure for actual tests was 18,000 a day, and that was down from Monday, which was 19,000 tests a day. So what does the First Secretary expect to happen in the next 8 days to get us from 18,000 tests a day to 100,000 tests a day?
But I do have to just correct him. Our capacity for tests is now at 40,000 per day. So I think that is an incredibly important milestone.
I didn't need correcting because I gave the figure for the actual tests a day. The First Secretary says that there's capacity for 40,000 tests a day. And I think it's really important that we fully understand what the First Secretary just said, because that means that the day before yesterday, 40,000 tests could have been carried out, but only 18,000 tests were actually carried out. Now, all week, I've heard from the front line, from care workers who are frankly desperate for tests for their residents and for themselves, desperate.
I thought that was pretty good, right? I mean, it wasn't a surprise to me that was pretty good, because, I mean, the thing Keir Starmer has going for him, his whole pitch was to say, look, I'm going to be okay at the dispatch box. I was a top QC. I'm the kind of guy who can, ask questions which put people in a difficult situation. And I thought he kind of managed it there. So, it made Dominic Raab, he sort of reeled Dominic Raab into saying that, what matters is that we've had 40,000 capacity. We've got the capacity for 40,000 tests. And Keir Starmer saying, well, no, I said you did 18,000 tests for a reason, because that's what matters. What matters is how many tests you do, not how many tests you hypothetically have the capacity to do. And I thought it was quite effective at sort of showing that the Tories they keep trying to shift the goalpost, and it's not particularly convincing. I'll go to you first, Aaron. What did you think? Pleasantly surprised?
No, I agree with you. It was really good. I mean, that's what he's good at. It's like saying that Jeremy Corbyn will be good at sort of going through,
a stump speech at Glastonbury.
yeah, or going to Tolpuddle in the summer and saying, the trade union movement is a really important thing in terms of changing society. We know what Keir Starmer's good at. The question is that sufficient to win a general election? I'm not going to deign to offer an answer now. I think one thing with the reaction, you sort of had a lot of sort of blue tick centrists or anti-socialists. Actually, that's the better word for them. A lot of them will say, "Oh wow, we finally got the leader we need, we deserve." What they need to understand is that parliamentary questions, PMQs, don't really matter to most people. In my lifetime, there's probably been 2 or 3 moments in PMQs where the public really sees what's going on. There's a cut through. Maybe once there was one interaction between John Major and Tony Blair. There was one interaction between David Cameron and Gordon Brown. There was maybe one interaction between Cameron and Corbyn, where Cameron monstered Corbyn. But even then, that's like 40% of the population kind of vaguely remembers seeing something to do with it. They're not pinned to Twitter or to Facebook or to BBC Parliament watching this stuff. So it's great he's good at that. It's great he's authoritative. But that in isolation isn't going to win you an election. And it's important to say most people don't think that. It is just a select group of several dozen sort of Times columnists and Evening Standard political diarists.
I'm going to go to Lara in a moment, but first of all, I want to go through some of the tweets from commentators and MPs from yesterday, because I don't know if it was that they all organically came to the same description for Keir Starmer's performance, but their reviews definitely all looked quite samey. So can we get up? I think the first one is of the pundit class, so we can get up some of these. So Julia Hartley-Brewer, very strong start from Keir Starmer at his first PMQs. And all fair and reasonable, put with forensic accuracy. George Eaton, friend of the show, that was pretty forensic by Starmer. Christian Rednedge, I'm not sure who he is actually, but already so forensic on detail. Liam Thorpe, he's from the Liverpool Echo. Starmer straight into it, already looking pretty forensic. Ian Martin, good forensic first questions from Starmer. He's from Reaction, the right-wing site with the sort of, I suppose, odd name. Can we get up the next lot? Lewis Goodall. Again, I like Lewis Goodall. He's also gone for forensic. Paul Waugh's gone for forensic. And now I think the next one we can look for is what all the MPs have said, which is also very similar. Yes, here we go. So now you can see all the different Labour MPs who've given exactly the same description of it. There's all the pundits in there as well. Do you think, are you in an NEC WhatsApp group? Did anything go around to say, can you please tweet that Keir Starmer was very forensic at the dispatch box? Or do you think this is just a coincidence?
Oh, I don't know. I guess it's good that this kind of thing is going around. Like I saw people going, why is everyone complaining? Because people were saying things about Corbyn that were bad. Like good things are going around now. Just leave it. And I get it, but I mean, I wasn't as impressed as others on his PMQs thing, because I think Rab kind of fucked up in a bit. Oh, can I swear on this? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. He kind of messed up because he got into that trap, so I think it was like okay exchange, but I don't know. I agree with Aaron that not many people watch it, so we've got to be aware of that, and how it fits into a wider kind of political scene that we're creating. And I think my highlight of PMQs under Jeremy Corbyn was him reading out name things in terms of people's stories, and how politics and policies were affecting them, and how he got angry about situations. And I really want to see that like passion and anger from Keir about injustice and what's going on. So yeah, I think it was okay, but I don't think it was like amazing and forensic. And I think there's this kind of image that people have set for Keir as like this amazing lawyer, and hopefully he plays up to it. But I'd like to see some of that rather than just sort of the lawyer side. The passion about that he says, about doing the right thing, about justice, the reason why he's explained that he went into law and stuff. So hopefully we'll see that. But yeah, I don't think people watch PMQs, and I don't think they will. It's fairly boring for people not involved with politics, and they don't understand how it affects their daily lives or their political outlook around them. So yeah, I didn't think it was that amazing.
Was it too constructive for you? That's sort of like some of the conversation afterwards. That this is Keir showing off what constructive opposition can look like. I mean, I was kind of annoyed because I feel like the left critiques of Keir Starmer were portrayed as we want him to be more angry, whereas my problem with Keir Starmer was I wanted him to ask genuinely difficult questions. The reason why I thought his PMQs there were quite good was because the questions he asked were hard. And they were about the things that people care about. So yeah, there wasn't that image of him standing up and saying, like, I'm the tribune of the people and I can speak in a sort of passionate, inspiring way. But he did get Dominic Raab to answer in an unconvincing way about testing. He got Dominic Raab to answer in an unconvincing way about the deaths of care workers. And he got Dominic Raab to answer in a very unconvincing way about personal protective equipment, which was a massive improvement on the week earlier where he was saying, can you publish your exit strategy? And the Tories were incredibly comfortable because they were saying, no, we're not going to publish it because we're in the middle of a lockdown. And most people listening to that were like, well, that sounds reasonable. It sounds like the Tories want to protect the NHS and the Labour Party are being a bit difficult. Whereas I feel like you couldn't portray him as that yesterday. So I thought that was a real...
Yeah, we've definitely improved from last week, but I think, it's pretty low bar. Like, I think the Tories are doing disastrously in this situation. And if we're able to call them out on their failures, like they have been actually lying at some stages. And I know you can't say that in the Houses of Parliament, but so I think this is the bar where we should be at, like here talking about the mistakes that they're making. So it shouldn't really be that hard to make them fall into traps because they're making the traps themselves in literally lying in their comms. So I don't think that's a particularly hard thing to do. It was bad last week or whatever. And we've moved forward from there, from talking about the exit strategy, which I just don't understand. I literally have not heard an NHS staff member talk about that. They've all been talking about testing and PPE. So I'm glad that he's shifted his focus. But yeah, the bar... we're now doing well instead of bad, but not amazing.
Can I just say also, a lot of the people that really adore Starmer are obviously kind of like big Blair fans. And Blair excelled at PMQs when he was passionate. Blair wasn't this forensic. Blair was like a bit of a populist. And
this one was weak.
Yeah.
Weak.
It was like he just absolutely went all in on John Major as a human being. It wasn't like, and on page 52, he didn't do that. That's not what he was good at. That's what Gordon Brown was good at. And there's like, and he's just been expunged. This idea of Blair the populist has been expunged from the kind of centrist psyche. That's not to say maybe Starmer can. I think personally, Starmer looking the way he does, being very polite, and I think you said it before, Michael, I agree with it. It buys you permission, actually, to be more radical than you otherwise can be as a party, potentially. I buy that argument. So the social movement behind Keir Starmer, the political party behind Keir Starmer, the trade unions behind Keir Starmer have permission to be that bit more radical if they play it cleverly, with that, play it more intelligently, if they have that guy at the front. I buy that argument. I'm not going to say it's going to work, but it's a logical, consistent argument. But the idea that this was a continuation of sort of the successful sort of, Blair kind of era of PMQs is just not accurate. They idolize the 1990s, but B, they almost completely, misremember it at the same time. It's kind of strange.
Should we start taking some audience questions? So put your questions in the comments with a rocket emoji or tweet them on the hashtag TiskiSour, and we will be very happy to answer.
Can I say one thing, Michael, before you say anything
go
else?
on, Aaron.
We've got 1,680 people watching, only 803 likes. It's great to have almost 1,700 people watching. Smash the like button. Doesn't cost you a penny.
Let's see. Is Fox putting any in there? Let's have a look. Tell me, while we're waiting for that, actually, Lara, last time we had you on, you were sort of waiting to be accredited as a doctor. Has that happened now?
Yeah.
You are a doctor, and are you now sort of in, what are you doing?
Yeah, so I'm between hospitals at the moment. So I've been doing some shifts in Orpington Hospital. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that. Just, when you second guess everything
you're not supposed to say the hospital and then trash it, is what I've been
I don't know,
I
don't know what I'm allowed to say anymore, to be honest. I'm always thinking about what I'm supposed to say or not. And then now I'm going to be in Eastbourne, which is near where I live in Hastings. So yeah, it's really good. I don't know what the right word is for. It's a humbling experience having been in ICU. But I mean, ICU is a fairly sad place anyway, normally, in terms of like the number of people who make it through ICU. So yeah, it's pretty sad. But interestingly, here's a fun little kind of thing about facts. about coronavirus, like I was literally on the ward and I was looking around going, there's literally no women here. All the patients were men on the ward. And then I know, because obviously it's affecting men more, maybe because they have more likely to have cardiovascular problems. I don't know. But yeah, literally hardly any women. We're seeing all men, all like older men. Very interesting.
That's really interesting. There was actually an interesting comment. I wish I had a clip actually of Patrick Vallance, who's the chief scientific advisor, who was asked about the gender differences in people suffering from COVID-19. And he was saying, there's so many things we don't know about the virus, why it affects men more than women, and various other sort of demographic issues. He also sort of said we don't know about immunity, and I was thinking then, like, I wish you were open about that when you a month ago when you were saying let's all let everyone catch it so they can get immune. Sort of like suddenly he's discovered uncertainty, just kind of a month too late. But what it made me think of, and what your comment there did, is that they've just discovered that not discovered, there's suspicious, or there's suggestions that potentially smoking, rather than sort of increasing your chances of being, very badly affected by COVID-19 because it damages your lungs and this is a respiratory infection, might actually be associated with being less likely to catch COVID-19 or being less likely to go into hospital. They think the connection might be nicotine. I don't know. Have you heard any? Have you followed this story?
I haven't heard anything about that. I don't know if there's like a paper you can link me, but I know that there's some weird things like that where smoking, or like people who've recently stopped smoking, tend to get certain diseases like ulcerative colitis. Smoking can actually dampen the symptoms down of that and things like that. It's always weird, but don't smoke, guys, obviously.
Well, what they've started doing is they're doing trials with nicotine patches. So they're going to start giving healthcare workers, as part of a trial, nicotine patches, because they think that's
it does have an effect on the cardiovascular system. So.
Can I ask a question? Ask a question to Lara? Yeah, it's a good question. This is from Michael McNeil. Thank you, Michael. Given the leaks, Michael McNeil, yeah, 2 L's. Given the leaks, I'm considering leaving the Labour Party and campaigning for the SWP, and I don't know if I should stay. Please help me make up my mind.
Okay. I don't think that would be a good idea. I have talked about before, I think that people should stay in the Labour Party. Joining the SWP is a different thing. I think in terms of staying in the Labour Party, if we deal with that first, I think if there's things in the report and other things that have made you demoralised about the Labour Party, the only way that is going to change if people in the Labour Party hold the NEC and the people investigating it to account. If you're not in the Labour Party, you won't be able to have a say over the outcomes in terms of membership and any changes that we make. You've got to be in something to change it. And in terms of joining the SWP, I mean, there's individual problems with the SWP as an organisation, which if you don't know, I'm sure people will raise awareness to them in regards to sexual assault. But in terms of joining any sort of socialist party, workers' party, I think you've got to ask in terms of outcomes, like, what are you getting? Like, there's a lot of socialist councillors and MPs around the country who are doing amazing work, and there's little influence from these socialist and workers' parties. And I think the fact is the Labour Party isn't a lost cause yet. There are a lot of socialists in it and at the top of it. And we need to continue to fight for that because they have the impact electorally. I say, like, if people, because I know there are a lot of people who've left the Labour Party with a lot of emotion over this, especially in regards to racism. And I would say, obviously get involved with your trade union and loads of other campaigns that are going on, anti-racism campaigns, pro-NHS campaigns. There are some great campaigns going on that you can get involved with. Just make sure your politics really does have that purpose and you feel like that you're achieving something. But in terms of the smaller parties, I think especially if you're running against the Labour Party, that's not really got the same purpose as being involved with maybe a general grassroots campaign. I think if you're in the world of electoral politics, the Labour Party has to be the way to go, and you've got to be in it to change it.
Can I add to that, Michael?
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean,
you don't need my permission, Aaron.
Well, you're the host. You're the host with the most. You can do you can take a step back. It's been a very intense few years. You can do more workplace organising. You can do more single issue campaign stuff. I don't understand why you wouldn't remain a member of the Labour Party, unless you can't financially afford it. You're going to participate in one internal election a year. You're going to select the next leader. You're going to select councillor and MP candidates over the next year or 2 or 3 years. And you might do a week's worth of canvassing, which would be great if every member did that, right? And I mean, these are very low asks. So basically a couple of online ballots, a couple of meetings a year, and a week of canvassing in local elections or a general election for socialist candidates. That's really not that much to ask. It's not like we're saying you have to go to every meeting, you must do door knocking every weekend. That's really not much. Just keep the direct debit up and participate in a few votes and knock on some doors for 1 week in a year. And that makes a huge difference if a couple of 100,000 people do it. So I agree with that. I agree with what Lara just said. The idea that, oh well, electoralism hasn't worked, we're going to do this thing instead. I think it's silly. Not childish, but it's pretty close.
Can I just add to that as well? Like, I agree that if that's what you want to do with the Labour Party, you should. However, also remember that at a real local level, the Labour Party really is what you make it. There's a lot of autonomy the sort of lower down the party you get. Set up a young Labour group, set up or like run for positions in your CLP and your branch. Hold these, obviously things done under the Labour Party name, but there's a lot of political education discussions going on, like alliance with local campaigns, food banks, all this stuff. Like the Labour Party can be what you make it, especially at a local level. So, if you're doing other political activism, just bring that in, get some more like highlights for it from Labour councillors, people in power already, So obviously you can do what Aaron says if you are completely demoralised, but if you've still got that political head on you and you just don't think the Labour Party cares about that anymore, then get doing it at a local level and start organising.
I've got a technical question which directly relates to that point, and it is from Mike McCarthy, who tweets on the hashtag Tiskisauer. He says, can we get CLP meetings taking place online to hold leadership to account? I've heard this from lots of members that they're a bit frustrated that there hasn't been any move towards Zoom meetings. And I think to some extent, actually, they've been banned from meeting, haven't they, in case they talk about the leaked document?
I don't think that's happened. I mean, the current guidance is that CLPs can't conduct formal business via Zoom call. Which I am just writing down in my notebook to email Jenny about because I need to add that to my list. So I think we just need to find out basically if we can do formal business. I think we should be able to now. Do you know what I mean? Because it's been going on for so long and we really can't not meet. I mean, I don't know if conference is going to go ahead because obviously we would normally be passing CLP motions to go to conference at this stage. So yeah, I need to follow up that about the CLP reps are doing the same, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I think you should still hold informal meetings. Formal business just means I think you can't pass motions, although I have seen some CLP motions passed. So I think there's a bit of confusion around the advice, but I definitely hold informal stuff meetings. There's no reason why you can't discuss the report. I think double check with Jenny Formby's email to all members that you should have got. You shouldn't be sharing the report or any unredacted information. But I don't think there's any reason why you can't be discussing the circumstances in the Labour Party with the new information we have. So yeah, I just encourage people to do informal meetings for the moment, and then we can chase up whether we can get formal motions and stuff passed.
I think I'm confusing. Actually, there was a request. So in the Jewish Labour Movement statement about the leaks, what they wanted the party to commit to was suspending any CLP that meets to discuss the leaks.
But that hasn't happened yet.
But that hasn't happened, right? Yes,
well,
that's my confusion there.
There's been, excuse me, there's been talk, I think it was in Leicester South, is it John Ashworth CLP? I was told that the secretary there was told that they couldn't access certain digital tools to organise events. And that this was being said to pretty much secretaries generally. Now, I've had other secretaries tell me that's not the case. But in regards to this specific person in Leicester South, I think that they said that was the case. Do you know if that's true or not? If secretaries can't access particular tools to organise events?
In terms of organising the data and things, yeah, I've heard rumours of that, but I don't know how true it is, or if regional directors and things are replying to emails. Obviously, some Labour Party staff are on holiday, or not on holiday, sorry, off sick. So yeah. I'm not sure, to be honest, but I'm happy to chase up that information because I think it's important that CLPs are still able to organise and contact their members in this time. You know, it's a time where we all, like, most need to be talking about politics, isn't it? And what we want the leadership to be doing. And a lot of people have got extra time on their hands, unfortunately, with less money in their pockets, but have the time to discuss that and meet. So yeah, as I say, keep informal meetings going up.
I want to go to one last question, which is kind of it relates to the first half of the show. Know it in your bones. #Tiski Sour. Isn't the lockdown supposed to just allow us to flatten the curve, or has this shifted to waiting until we have no new cases? I'm going to answer that first, which is that there's two different theories. So one of them was, you say you have a lockdown to stop exponential growth, to try and get the number of new infections kind of steady, so that we can stay within ICU capacity, and then sort of gradually loosen restrictions whilst trying to keep the transmission or the transmissibility below 1, so that you sort of have a constant level of infections running through the population. That's one theory, which we've been associating with Rishi Sunak and Michael Gove, because in Gove's word, they want to run this hot and sort of lift the lockdown whilst the virus is still around. So that would be the kind of flatten the curve angle. And then you've got another theory, which is what has been called the hammer and the dance, which is what they went for in East Asia, which is the idea that you have a lockdown which stops all infections altogether until you have almost zero new infections, and then you introduce a very aggressive test and trace system so that the virus doesn't re-emerge to try and sort of suppress any new outbreaks. So there's two theories about what the lockdown would entail.
Also, flattening the curve means if you flatten the curve at like 200, deaths per day, it depends whether you're flattening the curve of cases or deaths. That you're not necessarily stretching health capacity. You say, okay, we can now sort of do this for 6 months a year. You don't want to flatten the curve at where the US is right now, with thousands of people dying every day, because it's going to overwhelm healthcare systems, which is one of the reasons for the lockdown.
There's also I want to go to you, Laura, in a moment, in terms of if you're hearing from healthcare workers, which, if they're talking about these exit strategies and which one they prefer. But it's also worth saying, I think this whole flatten the curve idea, partly, that was part of a strategy when we were going for herd immunity, because the curve is because more and more people have become immune. Yeah. So sort of you have this acceleration period, and then once about 60% of the population have had it, then you start to see new infections go down. And sort of, so they've shifted this in the press conference. When they're asked about flattening the curve, they say, oh, well, actually, the reason the curve is flattening now isn't because the virus has reached a natural peak. It's just because we did the lockdown. So there isn't really, the whole curve notion sort of goes, becomes a bit less relevant than it once was. But yeah, Lara, I don't know what you think about this question. And also I'm interested, what's the mood in hospitals? Are doctors sort of paying attention to these press conferences and thinking, oh, I hope he announces that the lockdown goes on longer, or I hope he announces a new test and trace system, or are people just getting on with their jobs?
People really are getting on with their jobs, bless. I think, people haven't really been talking about the lockdown, apart from, when will it go on till? But I guess the flattening the curve strategy for me just seems like, that's still loads of people dying every day. So it doesn't really fill me with confidence. And I think if the lockdown was eased with just flattening the curve, then it would just have another peak. I think the main thing about it is really infectious. The mortality is still fairly low. So, what is it, like 5%? Obviously different between different countries. So people aren't really talking about when the lockdown is going to end. Obviously it's frustrating, but healthcare workers are also able to get out of their house. So, I think the key, this is why I was glad that Keir Starmer actually changed his tack, because people weren't really talking about the exit strategy, just getting on with it. But I think they're happy the peak is, they obviously, I don't know if we're over it or whatever, because obviously the ICU capacity seems to be okay, but there's just not a number of staff because a third of the workforce are off sick. So that's the main thing they're concerned about, is that there's no point having these beds and ventilators without staff. So
I think we're going to end it there. Thank you again for coming on the show, Laura McNeil. Always a pleasure to have you on, especially when it's to update us on some sort of latest gossip about what's
juicy gossip, and then I just give you unity.
Yeah, to be honest, it wasn't. It could have been more gossipy. You could have dished. I'm sure there was some dirt you could have dished, but you were too.
We tried, Michael.
Diplomatic. Aaron, always a pleasure. We'll be back tomorrow night. We still keep an eye on our Twitter feed, because we've got potentially a very interesting guest lined up, but I need to confirm it. So keep an eye on our Twitter, keep an eye on our Facebook. We'll be going live at 8 p.m. You've been watching Tiski Sour. You've been watching Novara Media. If you enjoyed this show, make sure you subscribe. If you want to support this show, allow it to continue, grow, allow Novara Media to expand, have more impact, then please make a donation at novaramedia.com/support. We'll be back tomorrow at 8 p.m. Good night.